So we've got Sarah here. She was baptised on the 28th of November. There's her parents, Henry and Peggy. So Margaret was known as Peggy. There's the surname Heald, which is an Anglo-Saxon name meaning hill. They lived in Chorley, and we can see that he was a printer. Let's take a look at the manifest for the John M. Wood voyage in April and May 1854. We can see Peter Greenhalgh. He is 25. He's a weaver. There'd been a child born on May the 23rd. This is the William Henry, who died shortly after and was buried at sea. Everybody, and welcome back to my channel. This is the first in an episode of a new series, and today I will be talking about my Mormon ancestors. Now, this series won't always focus on, say, mine or Dan's family histories, various of our ancestors' stories. I will probably be looking at other people, maybe a few famous people, maybe to see how they developed out of their family line. Today, though, we're going to talk about this lady, whose name is Sarah Heald, and her husband, Peter Greenhalgh. Now, Sarah was my first cousin 4 times removed, so her grandfather was my 4th great-grandfather, William Heald. He was a calico printer. So let's explore Sarah and Peter's story as 2 of the early Mormon pioneers. The second of 4 daughters born to Henry Heald, a calico printer, and his wife Margaret Milligan, Sarah Heald was born in Chorley, Lancashire on the 27th of November 1827 and was baptised the following day at Chorley, St. Lawrence. Although Sarah was baptised into the Church of England, her maternal grandparents, Robert Milligan and his wife Sarah Cloudsley, attended the Chorley Unitarian Chapel, which had been established in 1724. William Tate, the father of Sir Henry Tate, who was the founder of Tate and Lyle Sugar Company, was a prominent minister from 1799 to 1836, and his tomb is in the churchyard along with other family members. Sir Henry himself was a generous benefactor to Chorley and provided money to buy books in the Free Library in Avondale Road, while the organ and central choir seats in the chancel were donated by Sir William Tate, the grandson of the Reverend William Tate, in 1902. Unitarianism rejects the Christian doctrine of a Holy Trinity, affirming that God is a single entity rather than 3 persons in one being, and Jesus is a prophet, a human teacher or ascended master, rather than a divine figure. Unitarians emphasise the oneness of God, the celebration of life, reason, personal experience, and ethical living, often reading scripture critically and valuing moral improvement and social justice as the core of faith. Meanwhile, Sarah's father Henry was one of 15 children born to William Heald, a calico printer, and his wife Catherine Whittaker. William's parents were Evan Heald, a shoemaker and Bible Christian, and his wife Elizabeth Lee. Biblical Christians believe in one eternal God who created the heavens and the earth, focusing on a personal and trusting relationship with God, based on Scripture's testimony that humanity was made in his image. Through this relationship, believers seek salvation in Christ, who is both fully God and man, and the Bible teaches all the core beliefs and practices that shape a Christian's life, as the Holy Spirit in sharing the same eternal being, enabling them to know God's truth. In 18th and 19th century Lancashire, it was not at all uncommon for textile workers in particular to seek peace and salvation in nonconformist doctrines, as Robert himself and other Hills and their in-laws did. Let's have a look at Sarah's entry in the baptismal register for Chorley St Lawrence in 1827. It says, baptisms solemnised in the parish of Chorley in the county of Lancaster, as it was called back then. Now, it doesn't say Chorley St Lawrence because St Lawrence is the mother church, so it's automatically assumed that it's St Lawrence. So we've got Sarah here. She was baptised on the 28th of November. There's her parents, Henry and Peggy. So Margaret was known as Peggy. There's the surname Heald, which is an Anglo-Saxon name meaning hill. They lived in Chorley, and we can see that he was a printer. And the curate was J.S. Master. Now, he was still a curate in 1845, I found out from records. It doesn't say when she was born, but we know from other records kept by the Latter-day Saints. On the 3rd of May 1852, Sarah married Peter Greenhalgh, a weaver, son of William Greenhalgh, a provision dealer, and Margaret Hope, his wife, after banns at Eccles St Mary, Manchester. Peter had become a member of the Mormon church shortly before he and Sarah were married. Here is the 1851 census for Sarah and her parents and siblings. As you can see, the census was damaged, probably in archive. Other Heald censuses for the same period were damaged in a similar manner. But we can read some of it, even though the writing is quite faint. The census was taken just over a year before Sarah's marriage to Peter Greenhalgh. We have here Henry Heald, her father. He was 50 years old, married, and he was a calico printer. We can just about make that out, along with his wife Margaret, 49 years old. No occupation. She would have been looking after the home. Then there's Sarah, daughter, unmarried. It's difficult to read her age, but it looks to be around 23 from what I can make out, and she was a weaver. And we have her sister Caroline, unmarried. I can't read her age, but she was a mender. And then they had a lodger called Ellen Hay, and she was a 71-year-old widow. I'm not sure whether she was related in any way, though. Now, the Shuttleworth buildings were in Salford, and incidentally, I need to find out whether Henry was working for his brother George. His brother George Heald had a calico works in Salford. So that's 1851. We're going to take a look now at a couple of parish records in respect of Peter and Sarah. The first one is the marriage record. Marriage solemnised at the parish church in the parish of Eccles, in the county of Lancaster. The parish church was Eccles St Mary. So we have May the 3rd, 1852. Peter Greenhalgh, age of full age, bachelor, so he was a weaver as well, we can see. He was living at Mill Street, Pendleton. His father was William Greenhalgh, and he was a provision dealer, which is a grocer. But to begin with, William was actually also a weaver. So he'd gone up in the world. And then below that we have Sarah Heald, of full age, spinster. And here we can see she isn't working at this point. She was living at 5 Shuttleworth Terraces, Pendleton. So we know the number now that she and her parents and siblings were living at in 1851. Henry Heald was her father, and we can see that he was a calico printer. The marriage was after banns, and the vicar presiding over the marriage looks to be a W. Marsden. If they had been unable to read and or write, there would have been a cross with Mark written next to the name. And then we can see that witnesses were Abraham Greenhalgh and a Mary Ann Rawcliffe. So that's quite interesting. Abraham Greenhalgh was a relative of Peter's. Because the names tended to repeat themselves within and between generations, I'm not quite sure whether Abraham was a cousin, a brother, or an uncle. Next, let's look at Peter's baptism in the register. This is baptisms solemnised in the parish of Dean in the Methodist chapel. So his parents were Methodists. In the county of Lancashire, this register covers the years 1829 to 1831. Here we go, 1830, born the 1st of March, baptised April the 1st, 1830. Peter, the son of William and Margaret Greenhalgh. They were living at Tildesley in the parish of Lee in Lancashire. And here William is a weaver. So this is long before he became a provision dealer. The minister looks to be a C. Chetham. So there we go. The Methodist chapel was otherwise known as the Wesleyan chapel. Methodism was founded by John Wesley, a philosopher, a teacher, an academic, and an evangelist in the 18th century. And he, in fact, went all over the country preaching. And the Methodist or Wesleyan faith is based on justice, dignity, and solidarity. So Methodists will respond to the gospel of God's loving Christ and live out its discipleship in worship and mission. God loves you unconditionally. There's no conditions attached. And Dan and I, in fact, we once, when we went down to Cornwall, we saw one of the places where John Wesley preached out in the open, which was tremendous. Mormons believe in the restoration of original Christianity. After the death of the apostles, essential priesthood authority and truths in the gospel were lost in the great apostasy, but God restored this authority through Joseph Smith and his scouts Brigham Young and John Pack in the early 19th century, re-establishing Christ Church with living prophets, apostles, and new scripture, such as the Book of Mormon, Doctrine of Covenants, and Pearl of Great Price. Unlike the Holy Trinity, God the Father, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Ghost are three distinct beings united in purpose. God the Father and Jesus Christ have perfected physical bodies, while the Holy Ghost is a spirit. Jesus Christ is central to Mormon belief. His atonement allows humans to be saved from sin and return to live with God and their families forevermore. Marriage between a man and a woman is considered ordained of God, and families are eternal units. Practices such as eternal marriage and baptism for the dead reflect the belief in eternal progression and salvation for all, which is why family history research is so important to Mormons. The first Latter-day Saints missionaries had arrived in Preston in 1837, and there they established the Preston Ward, the longest continuously functioning church unit worldwide. Today, the Preston, England Temple is the 52nd operating temple of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which was built in 1992 in Chorley. Although they had a large family, the early days of Sarah and Peter's marriage were tinged with tragedy, as their first 3 babies died in infancy. Margaret was born on 12th December 1852 and died the following day. Lorenzo was born on the 28th of August 1853 and lived only a few hours. These 2 children were born at Radcliffe, Lancashire. A heavily pregnant Sarah and her husband Peter set sail from Liverpool for New Orleans on the 8th of April 1854 aboard the single-masted ship Marsfield, or the John M. Wood as it was otherwise known, with the rest of the 406 passengers. A second son, William Henry, was born at sea on the Gulf of Mexico on the 24th of May 1854 and was buried at sea. Let's take a look at the manifest for the John M. Wood voyage in April and May 1854. We can see Peter Greenhalgh. He is 25. He's a weaver. There'd been a child born on May the 23rd. This is the William Henry, who died shortly after and was buried at sea. Below him is Sarah. She's 26. And they had 2 boxes and 4 bags. That's really not a lot of luggage. Very few of them, though, on the manifest had much luggage. Some people only had 1 box. So quite a few of them had a couple of boxes or 2 bags. We had 1 or 2 who had a barrel. There's only 1 person up at the top here who had 8 boxes, and somebody had some carpenter tools as well. They were part of the same family, those 2 there. But they had very little. So basically, they just packed everything that they had and just left for a new life. Whatever meagre chattels they had just got packed and taken with them. But most of them had very little indeed. They were hopeful, probably, that they were going to have a new life and didn't want to be weighed down by chattels. They wanted to be free to travel as expediently and lightweight as possible in the hope of making a new life for themselves. There was a soldier there. And you had labourers. There was a tobacconist, a builder, carpenter, blacksmith. But a lot of them didn't seem to have any job at all. This, of course, was during the Industrial Revolution, and it was a time of great change, and it was also the start of when there was more imports coming into Britain, and some trades were on the wane. So it was a time of great changes, and it's also a time when people started to migrate more to places further afield than what a horse and cart would give them, which was about 10 miles in a day. Sarah and Peter then travelled by steamboat from New Orleans to Kansas City, Missouri, where they joined with other saints on the Pioneer Trail and crossed the plains with the William Empney Company, arriving at Deseret, or Salt Lake City, on the 24th of October 1854, following a 3-month journey overland. Deseret is derived from the word for honeybee in the Book of Mormon. The Pioneer Trail to Salt Lake Valley stretched across 2 decades between 1847 and 1868. Most of the new arrivals were followers of the Church of the Latter-day Saints, seeking a new land to live their lives and practice their religion. Some 60,000 Mormons travelled in companies, some 300 different ones over that 20-year spread, of which the William Empney Company was one. Travel was by steamboat, wagon train, railroad train, walking and riding of horses. Covering such uncharted land was not easy for the men, women and children who went on the pioneer trail, and many died along the way. There were journals kept, documents, rosters of those who started off on the trail, those who didn't make it, and those who reached the Salt Lake Valley. The William Empley Company in 1854 played a significant role in the history of the relationship between the Mormons and Native American peoples. William Empley, together with other members of his company, was instrumental in establishing ferry services across the North Platte River to assist the saints travelling to the Salt Lake Valley. This service was crucial for the early settlers, as it enabled them to cross the river and access the fertile land promised by the church. Empley's efforts were part of a broader effort by the church to support its members during their migration and settlement effort. Sarah and Peter went to Willard, Utah, and stayed at the home of John Wood during the first winter, and they were among the early pioneers of this community. They remained in Willard until 1863. This is the census for 1860. It says 3 inhabitants, no village or anything, in the county of Box Elder, Utah, on the 20th of July 1860. And here we have, it's spelt Peter Greenhalgh, which is another version of how Greenhalgh is pronounced. So we see that he's 30 years old and he's a farmer. Looks like he's a farmer. And it says he was born in England. And then we've got Sarah, she's 32. We've got their son Peter Jr. He's 4 years old. We can see he was born in Utah. And then we've got Thomas, he's 2 years old, also born in Utah. And we've got Sarah, who is 1 month old, also born in Utah. So that's quite interesting. There's a column for whether deaf and dumb, blind, idiotic, pauper. None of them appear to be any of those things. And then there's a column for attended school within the year. None of those have. And of course, none of them were married within the year. It's interesting that they've got the value of personal estate and the value of real estate as well. The value of real estate for Peter and his family is $240. And the values of personal estate are $170. So they're not doing too bad for themselves. Remember, this is back in 1860. Although some on the census have a lot more value, $870 worth of real estate and $2,000 of personal estate. But they're not doing too bad as farmers. They're getting there. And it also shows whether people are white or black. It would appear there's 23 white males and 16 white females, and nobody is black. Interesting that they differentiate between race and disability. There's one idiot and one pauper. Interesting. While living at Willard, Peter was called to go to Echo Canyon on the Utah-Arizona border and help in the trouble with Johnston's army during the Utah War of 1857 to 1858, which erupted under the newly appointed US President James Buchanan, who sought to replace Brigham Young with a non-Mormon governor. The war was mostly a bloodless confrontation between Mormon settlers in Utah Territory and the US government, sparked by political, religious, and governance tensions. Buchanan dispatched 2,500 soldiers to escort the new governor, Alfred Cumming, to Salt Lake City. The Mormons saw this action as a threat of annihilation, declared martial law, and mobilised their local militia, the Nauvoo Legion, to delay the troops. Tactics included burning supply trains and driving government cattle to the Great Salt Lake Valley, but the conflict largely remained a standoff. Sarah and Peter had a further 7 children. In Willard, Peter, born in 1855, who married Rebecca A. Welker. Thomas Almer, born in 1857, who married Josephine Krogh. Sarah Ann, born in 1860, she died in 1871 in Bloomington. Catherine, who was born in 1862 and died in infancy. Mary Ellen, born in 1864, who married David L. Nelson. And in Bloomington, Idaho, Adelia, born in 1867, who married Charles Henry Hart, an eminent lawyer and Latter-day Saint. And Franklin, 1870 to 1967. He had a long life, dying aged 96 years. He was married to Frances Amelia Thomas. In the year 1863, Sarah and Peter were called to help settle Bear Lake Valley, spending the winter within the limits in what is today the city of Paris. They were delayed in starting for Bear Lake due to the illness of their son, Peter Jr., who had typhoid fever. After they arrived in Bear Lake Valley, they moved over onto Bloomington Creek, erected their tent, put down their covered wagon box as a sleeping apartment, and with a few other families began to establish the village of Bloomington, where they built one of the first log cabins and experienced the hardships of pioneer life. Now, through Adelia's marriage to Charles Henry Hart, there's an exciting link to other prominent saints, so please do watch to the end to find out how. Peter served as a superintendent of the Bloomington Sunday School for over 40 years and was chorister of the choir for many years. Sarah was a midwife and assisted in bringing many children into the world. No night was too cold or journey too long to stop her from getting out of a warm bed to help the sick when she was called. She served as Relief Society president for 15 years. Peter and Sarah were very good singers, and in the early days they sang in a quartet with Joshua Jarvis and his wife Mary Ann. They also sang together in a duet and contributed greatly to the entertainment in their ward and other communities. They continued to live in Bloomington until 1916, when they moved to Brigham City and lived with their son Franklin. I have some more censuses here that we're going to take a quick look at as well. I've got 1870, 1880, there didn't appear to be one for 1890, 1900, 1910 and 1920. So let's take a quick look at those. So this is the one for 1870. Inhabitants in Bloomington now. The village actually has a name. In the county of Rich, Utah. Enumerated on the 22nd day of July 1870 by James A. Browning, and it's Bloomington Post Office. So here we can see Peter, still spelt Greenhalgh, and it's got his age as 41, and he's a farmer. The value of real estate is now $500, and his personal estate is now $400. So they're getting on okay now. This is 10 years after the 1860. And his place of birth is England. We can see that he's over 21 years of age. They only wanted to know about males. and of course is from overseas. And we've got Sarah, she's 43, and she's keeping house. We have Peter Jr., he's 14, he's at home. Thomas, he's 12, also at home. Sarah, 10, also at home. Mary, 6 years old, at home. Adeline, at home, she's 3. And then Franklin is 3 months old and he's at home. So that's 1817. Then let's look at 1880. Inhabitants in Bloomington, in the county of Bear Lake, territory of Idaho. Enumerated on the 13th day of June 1880. So here we have Peter Greenhalgh. He's still a farmer. He's 50 years old. Sarah, his wife, is 53. She is a housekeeper. Peter Jr., he's 24. He's a labourer. Thomas, 22, also a labourer. Mary, 16. She's at home. She was born in Idaho. Adelia, she's at home. And Franklin, he's 10 years old and he's at school. It doesn't appear to show here the value of any land or real estate, but I take it they were probably doing okay. But he seemed to be very successful as a early Mormon pioneer and achieved quite a lot in his lifetime. And it's a bit misleading as well that Sarah was at home, or a homekeeper, or a housekeeper, because she was actually a midwife for over 40 years. But maybe that was in a non-occupational capacity. I'm not sure. Anyway, let's go on to 1900 and let's see where we are now. It's interesting now that Thomas Alma Greenhalgh now has his own wife and family on the same page of the census as his father Peter. So it says State Idaho, County Bear Lake, Township or other division of county, Bloomington. Enumerated on the 9th day of June 1900 by James H. Wallace. This is sheet number 5. We've got Peter down here, and it shows that he was born in England. There's an anomaly here on the actual number of children born and the actual number who passed away. They'd had 10 children altogether, but actually 5 had passed away, not 4. So there's an anomaly there. So there was just the 2 of them. And he was still a farmer at the age of 70. And their son, Thomas Alma Greenhalgh, was a salesman, groceries. So that's what he was doing. Very interesting. They'd had 6 children, he and his wife, by this time, and all 6 were still living. So this is 1910, Bloomington precinct in Idaho, in the county of Bear Lake. And this is 5th of May, 1910. And the census taker looks to be a P.E. Dunford. So we've got Peter Greenhalgh here, and is the head of his household. He's now 80 years old, and it looks like he's still working. He's a market gardener at 80 years old. What a man. And Sarah is still at home, and she's 82. That's kind of unbelievable that they're still working. And then this is the last of the censuses. This is 14th census of the United States, 1920. The state is Utah, the county Box Elder. The township is Box Elder Precinct. The name of the incorporated place is Brigham City, part of Brigham City, of course, named after Brigham Young. So the census was taken by Ida K. Lee on the 15th day of January 1920. So there you see, each 10 years the census has been getting a bit earlier on within that 10-year period. We started off with July, then we went to June, and so on and so forth. Now we're at January. So it's not quite 10 years between each period. Peter and Sarah are living in the household of their son Franklin and his wife. Franklin is a mechanic. Peter, who is now 89, doesn't appear to be working, so he's retired at last. Thank goodness for that. And Sarah too, who is 92 years old, is also not working. At least now, of course, they're in the home of their son Franklin and his wife and kids, so they're being looked after, presumably. They're now of a rather advanced age. I've pulled out a couple of pieces of information that I found online about Peter Greenhalgh and some of his family members. So let's take a quick look at them. This one is from the Pioneers and Prominent Men of Utah for the year 1854, which is when some or all of these individuals travelled with one of the companies across the Pioneer Trail. So first we've got Peter Greenhalgh himself. He was born 1st of March 1830 in Lee, England, came to Utah October 24th, 1854 with a William E. Anthony Company. He was a farmer and stock raiser. Resides at Bloomington, Idaho. Then we've got his son, Peter Jr., born November 9th, 1855 in Willard, Utah. Resides at Bloomington. And then we've got various people called Butterworth. Now there's another branch of the Heald family tree that married into the Butterworths, or rather the Butterworths married into them. I'm not sure how these two gentlemen are related, but as they were from Lancashire, one would assume that they weren't too distantly related. I haven't sat down and worked out their particular family line. Now, I've got here Pioneers and Prominent Men of Utah, some literature. So we've got a few names that immediately come out. So we've got Peter Greenhalgh Jr. So there's a bit about his achievements. Then we have Thomas Greenhalgh, son of William Greenhalgh. So this is Peter Greenhalgh Sr.'s brother. Basically, this has the lineage. So the marriages and how many children they had and what they did. This Thomas was a fundamental Mormon and had various marriages going on at the same time. So he was in polygamous relationships. So he was a fundamental Mormon. And then one of his sons was Abraham Greenhalgh. Now remember, we met another Abraham earlier on Peter and Sarah's marriage record. Not the same gentleman, another one. So that is really interesting. There was a number of them who were pioneers and prominent men of Utah. So that's rather nice. They had been married for nearly 70 years when Sarah passed away on the 14th of January 1922 at the age of 94 years, and she was buried at Bloomington Cemetery. So this is Sarah's death certificate. Let's have a look at this. So place of death, Box Elder, city, Brigham, number 20 South 4th East Street. Full name, Sarah Greenhalgh. Residence, 20 South 4th East Street, 1st Ward. Length of residence, 6 years. And it showed she'd been living in the United States for 50 years. Actually, even longer. It was more like getting on for 65 years, 66 years. It says colour or race, white. Ooh. So there's still this feeling of a sense of segregation. And this is 1922. So that's a death date. Husband, Peter Greenhalgh. It's got her date of birth, 27th of November, 1827. So I hereby certify that I attended deceased from January 11th, 1922 to January 14th, 1922. That I last saw her alive on January the 11th, 1922. And death occurred on the date stated above at 3 p.m. The cause of death was senile decay, and she had an infected left toe. That was the contributory factor to the death. She'd had a callus on her foot cut out, and it had got infected. Ouch. Poor woman. What a way to go. There was no test confirming diagnosis. It's very sad. It shows the date of burial as the 15th, so she was buried the following day in Bloomington. And the undertaker was Jesse Hooper. It looks like Hooper. And the informant was Frank Greenhalgh of Brigham. And of course, Sarah and Peter were both living in his household. It also shows the name of her father, Henry Heald, and that he was born in England, and there was Margaret Milligan, also in England, and she was a housewife. At the age of death, she was 94 years, 1 month and 17 days. Tragic. Senile decay just means old age. But really, I think she would have gone on for longer had it not been for the infected toe. Perhaps it had started to go gangrenous. Don't know. Very sad. Then I found a nice obituary online in respect of Sarah. This was published in the Paris Post. That's Paris, Utah. Thursday, 19th January 1922. Body of pioneer shipped to Bloomington for burial. The sacred little city of the dead in which repose the noble forefathers of the village of Bloomington has been additionally hallowed by the interment of the remains of Sarah G. Greenhalgh, an original pioneer of that community. It's most gratifying to the present inhabitants of the village to have the old-time residents, whose temporary interests made it advisable for them to move elsewhere to finish their life's work, brought back at their request to the old home to be placed at rest amongst the stalwart ones with whom they stood shoulder to shoulder through all the struggles of pioneer days. That's very flowery language. Thus, when it was learned that the remains of the beloved Sister Greenhalgh were to be brought there for interment, the hearts of the young and old alike pulsated with gratitude at the thought of this being able to show their love for the sweet soul who had meant so much in so many ways to the life and being of the community. The opportunity thus given of showing to Mr. Greenhalgh the genuine catcomb in which he was held was also fully appreciated, because no one ever held a warmer spot in the affection of people than does he, who has served them so long and so well as instructor and employer. That he was able, at the advanced age of 92, to accompany his wife's remains to their final resting place during this inclement season is truly remarkable. It was very touching to note the swelling emotions that well nigh overcame many of his old-time neighbours and friends. Mrs. Sarah Greenhalgh, who died in Brigham City, Utah, on the 14th instant, was born in Lancashire, England, 94 years ago. With her husband, she came to Utah in 1854, crossing the plains by ox team to Salt Lake City, where they remained but a few days. As they came on the Willard, Box Elder County, where they resided until the spring of 1864, when they, among the first settlers, pitched their tents and put down their wagon boxes for residences on the banks of a gushing stream that bounded through blooming meadows and plains, from which Bloomington derived its name. Here life began anew in a community thus newly born. The proverbial sagebrush was cleared away, virgin soil broken, ditches were gotten out, land was allotted to individual families, city lots were fenced, streets opened, permanent dirt-roofed log houses and public buildings erected, social and religious life begun with all the zeal and enthusiastic devotion of young people eager to grapple with the problems at hand and ahead. In those primitive days as now, there were times of rejoicing and times of sorrow. Conspicuous through all were Mr. and Mrs. Greenhalgh. For upward of 30 years, she responded freely to the call of distress, and numerous prominent men and women in this and surrounding communities were first greeted by her at the commencement of their life's journey. At the organisation of the Relief Society in this ward, she became the first president, and for 15 years her administration was marked with a success that demonstrated the wonderful usefulness of the movement. As sweet singers of Israel, Mr. and Mrs. Greenhalgh will ever be remembered by all whose good fortune it was to hear them. The services held in the ward chapel were attended by a very large congregation, notwithstanding the extreme bitterness of the weather. Bishop Hart presided. The invocation was offered by Elder George Bateman, the speakers Superintendent James L. Dunford, President Roy A. Welker, and President Charles H. Hart of Salt Lake City, who is the son-in-law of the deceased, all paid glowing tribute to loveliness and worthiness of the departed, and uttered words of comfort and consolation to the aged partner in the matrimonial companionship of nearly 70 years, also to the surviving sons, Thomas A. of Logan and Frank of Brigham City, all of whom were present at the services. The dedicatory prayer at the grave was offered by Elder George H. Ward. So this here is Peter's death certificate. He was gone within a couple of years of Sarah's passing, and he was the same age when he passed away, 94 years. It showed that he'd lived in the United States for 70 years, which is correct. So he died in the county of Box Elder in Brigham City at 22 South 4th East Street, 1st Ward. Full name Peter Greenhalgh. He died at his residence. White. Widower. His wife, Sarah's name. His date of birth, the 1st of March 1830. He was 94 years old, 3 months, 11 days. He had no profession. He was born in England. His father was William Greenhalgh of England and Margaret Hope of England. And the informant was his son, Frank Greenhalgh. Filed 13th June 1924. Date of death, June 12th, 1924. He was last seen alive on the 1st of June. Death occurred at 1:30 p.m. He had acute dilation of the heart. He died suddenly before medical help could be given. Contributory factor was senility or old age. How sad. It had a hard life though. It's no wonder he had heart problems after so many years as a farmer, tilling the land and raising livestock, and being one of the founders, along with Sarah and a few other like-minded people, of the village of Bloomington. They built it all themselves. No autopsy. He had a history of it. Yeah, so it had problems for a while. It doesn't say how long it had problems for though. How sad. And he was buried with Sarah at Bloomington Cemetery. And then there's a nice obituary to him. Bloomington, last resting place for Bear Lake pioneer. On Monday the 16th, funeral services were held in the Bloomington Ward Chapel in honour of Peter Greenhalgh, who at the ripe age of 94 passed away at the home of his son Franklin in Brigham City, Utah. Peter Greenhalgh was born in Lancashire, England in 1830. He became a member of the Mormon Church in 1852, and in that year he married Miss Sarah Heald, who was 2 years his senior. Shortly after, they emigrated to Utah, reaching Salt Lake City, 24th of October 1854. It's got a really lovely tribute to him. It's usually hazardous to attempt to name all the worthy men and women who stood shoulder to shoulder in the formation of that pioneer community. There were so many of them, and they were of such uniform excellence that to omit from the list anyone would be to cause regret. Among them, Peter Greenhalgh stands out as one of the most eminent. Wow. Imagine that. It said was stated at his funeral, a community of congenial spirits, a real aristocracy, not based on pomp and show or wealth and its attendant frivolity, but an aristocracy based upon industry, honesty, integrity, optimism, intelligences, brotherly love and mutual helpfulness. He was leader of the ward choir for several decades and superintendent of the Sunday school for 42 years, and in that capacity for duration, faithfulness and punctuality, he made a record unequalled by any other man in the church. He was true to his family, true and loyal to his friends. He loved his friends and his association with them. He was uniformly jovial, had a rare fund of Lancashire wit, lovely dry humour. It was always a pleasure to meet him. He had unbounded faith in the truth and divinity of the gospel. His testimony was firm and always born in unmistakable language. He was a great reader, fond of good literature, and kept himself informed along all lines of importance. He was a true Christian, a consistent Latter-day Saint. Though very pious, he never made himself odious, even to the young, by sanctimoniousness. Mr. Greenhalgh leaves a posterity numbering over 100 each, a credit to his name. The funeral on Monday was well attended, friends from various parts of the county and some from elsewhere being present. Bishop Hart presided. Music was furnished under the direction of the ward choir leader. The speakers were J. L. Dunford, William L. Rich, Alvaro Dunn, President Charles Henry Hart and Bishop A. A. Hart. All spoke feeling of the splendid qualities and life of the departed. Interment was in the Bloomington Cemetery. The grave was dedicated by George H. Ward. Oh, isn't that a lovely story? So sad, but what a life. So let's talk about Adelia Greenhalgh. and her marriage to Charles Henry Hart. And this is the exciting part. She was my second cousin 3 times removed. They had 11 children, including Lucille Adelia Hart, my third cousin twice removed. Now, she died postpartum. Now, she was a graduate of the Brigham Young University and a gifted violinist. She married a gentleman called Worley Douglas Pack. They had 3 children together. The youngest was a girl. If you look at the family tree, you will see that Worley's grandfather was John Pack, who, along with Brigham Young, was Joseph Smith Stout. So Joseph Smith, John Pack and Brigham Young were the founders of the Mormon faith. And Julia Ives was Worley's grandmother, and she was the first of John Pack's 8 wives. John Pack was also a fundamental Mormon and had 8 marriages and 42 children. He lived with wife number 6 and used to go round all their wives and children on his pony and trap. Isn't that incredible? And then Charles Henry Hart had a sister called Alice Catherine Hart. She married George Anson Osmond. And yes, there is a link to the Osmonds, the famous Osmonds. His half-brother was Rulon Osmond, who was the grandfather of the famous Osmonds. So even if the link is through marriage, you're still related, you're still connected as a family member, because your family has married into their family. It doesn't matter whether you're blood related or not, you're still part of the family. I found out about this link nearly 20 years ago, and at the time I was just blown away. But it's been very interesting revisiting it. So, all in all, I think Sarah Hild and Peter Greenhalgh had the most incredible life. Although things started off for them in a very sad way, they lost 3 babies, they could have just fallen apart, but they didn't. They were eminent early pioneers, and they had such faith as to push forward and make a good life for themselves and the family, even though things were very hard to begin with. And undoubtedly they suffered persecution for their faith as well as hardship. Not just maybe financial hardship, but also a hardship of the terrain, the weather conditions, the vast expanse of desert and woods and heat. And their descendants too continued in the same vein, and they embraced all kinds of challenges and achieved so much within their almost 70 years of marriage. And I do like to think that I might have inherited a little bit of the qualities that Sarah had, not just from her faith, but also her conviction and her true female warrior spirit and her dedication and determination and positivity. So then, what do you think of Sarah's story? I think it's a remarkable segment of the family history. And there's more stories that are also remarkable of some of the other people. But let me know your thoughts. What do you think? And please, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like. Please comment. Please share and subscribe. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Until then, bye for now.